Tsunami Books, the best bookstore this side of the Gulf of Mexico. My name is Charles, and this is the third Saturday of every month literary reading. Tonight, of course, we're having a reading of the anthology that many of us are in. We got 15. Okay. So, I hope you brought your metaphor bucket and it's ready to be filled. I just made that up. Anyway. We're really swinging some metaphors. Yeah. So, I'm introducing Kathryn Ridall, who I met in Robert Bly conference in Pacific Grove, which is adjacent to Monterey, California. And we became quick friends, and she's quite a warm-hearted person and also very brilliant. And so Kathryn is moved up here from, she and her husband moved here from Berkeley, California a couple of years ago, and up to Wattage. Anyway, I'm a little biased, but she is, has a chapbook visitations, and she'll probably talk more about that at some point. She also edited an anthology called When the Muse Calls, and there are copies of that around. This has people, poets who live elsewhere, like somebody named Billy Collins. And of course, she is wonderfully edited What the River Brings, and it's a very fine anthology of Oregon poets. Anyway, without further ado, here's Kathryn.
Well, it's so great that so many poets came. When I thought about this event, I thought, well, you know, maybe 5 or 6 people will come, of poets, and I never guessed that 15 people would show up for this. So I'm really grateful. So I'm going to talk a little. I'm going to do my thank yous first, and then we're going to have the first set of readings. And when I thought about doing this is a community book. So when I thought about doing the thank yous, you know, I could have gone on for 45 minutes on thank yous. And so then I thought of the Academy Awards and how when people say thank you too much, you know, the music starts going up and then this hand comes and sort of pulls you off the stage. So when I thought about that, I realized, okay, I need to keep the thank yous down. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to acknowledge the people in the Eugene, Springfield area. But I want you to know that there are people all over the state who helped this anthology. And, but I think there are plenty of people just in this room, in this area, to thank. So first to Scott. And Scott does such a valiant job of keeping Tsunami viable. And I think we really owe a lot to his endurance and to his passion for this. So thank you, Scott. Next, I want to thank Charles Thielman, who came up and introduced me. And as Charles says, we're good friends, and he's the one who coordinates this reading. And when I told Charles, like about 3 months ago, I said, oh, Charles, we were having lunch. I said, oh, Charles, finally this river book is done. And without missing a beat, he said, well, wouldn't you like to have your lunch? There was something about that lack of hesitation, not missing a beat, that's what a friend is. So thank you, Charles. Next, I'd like to mention my husband, Roger Berry. And Roger and I co-publish Fay Press together. And without Roger, none of the books that I do would come to fruition. We hammer out every single detail of the publishing aspect together. So for instance, in this book, it has a yellow cover, and I knew going in that I wanted either a yellow cover or a light green cover. Well, yellow and green are really squirrely colors. I mean, awful. So we spent hours trying to find the right yellow. So thank you so much for your patience and for the work you do to help my visions come to fruition. Demetra, do you want to stand up? This is Demetra Callums, and Demetra did the cover watercolor of this book. Yeah, and she's a wonderful watercolorist, and not so much in this particular painting, but in a lot of her paintings, there's beautiful colors and composition, and then there's something slightly eccentric, and I love that about her work. You know, all this kind of balance, and so there's like a little twist. So thank you so much, Demetra. Next, I'd like to thank my dear friend Claudia Lapp. And I did most of this book by myself. And so toward the end of the book, I had the arc of the book. I had 4 sections. I had the arc within each of the sections. But there were maybe 3 places which they were just a knot. And I'd worked so much alone, I couldn't see how to get through the knots. I just couldn't see it. I was blind as a bat. So Claudia came in for maybe 10 days. She read the book top to bottom. And then we sat down at my kitchen table and we worked on those knots. She made brilliant suggestions. And by the time we got up from the table, the book was ready to publish. So thank you, Claudia, for your warm heart and your good eye. When I started this book, I'd only been in town 3 months, and I didn't know anybody. I didn't know any poets. I'd gone to a few readings, and I knew a few people here and there, but I didn't know anybody. And so I sent out an email to a couple people who I'd seen at readings, and I asked them if they would, if I could use certain poems of theirs. Those 2 people were John Witte and Erik Muller. So what happened is that both of them said yes, but then each of them sent me 20 names of poets that they would like to see in this anthology, and they were accurate email addresses. There wasn't one wrong email address. And both of them said to me also, you can use my name to introduce yourself when you send the email out. So they saved me years, I mean really, they saved me years of work, and they oriented me to the poetry community here, like where I should be looking. And so I really think this book would have taken longer and I may have given it up. So they're very pivotal to the fact that this book got published. And John actually ran this by a publisher, which I appreciate. And then when it turned out that I was going to need to self-publish, Erik just, you know, gave me a come home to Jesus talk. He said, this is what you have to do to make this viable. So thank you so much, you two, really. There are 3 people who came forward to help for this reading tonight. And one is, now Sam, I'm going to have to read your name, is Sam Roderick Rojas Chawa. And Sam did the wonderful poster for this reading, and he also did the video invite. So he's like our poster guru. He does these wonderful things that a lot of us just don't know how to do. So I don't know where you are, Sam, but there you are. Thank you so much for doing this. And at the back of the room is Stephen Blue, who got in touch and asked if I wanted this video taped, and I hadn't thought of that, so thank you, Stephen. Good idea. Thanks to my friends who brought food, but I actually want to acknowledge Martha Gatchell, because I have been to so many readings where, you know, it's like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and right in the middle of the table is a hearty bowl of hummus and some grape leaves, and like she feeds us. And when I heard that she was bringing food to this reading, I was like, phew, everybody's going to get fed, I don't have to worry anymore. So thank you, Martha. And finally, of course, the poets in this book. And one of the big gifts of this project was that I found out how many fine poets are writing in Oregon, and really particularly in Eugene. This is really a poetry town. I think our per capita rate of poets is really off the charts. So this is really, I thank you all for submitting. And I also thank people who submitted, but who, like, I got some good poems like about European rivers and other things, and it just wasn't what the book was doing. So thank you for the people who submitted, who followed me through with this, and then the people who submitted and I wasn't able to do their poetry. So the way this evening is organized is that we have 6-word bios of each that I'm going to introduce people with. And I know some people think these 6-word bios are like a pain in the butt. Oh no. But I love them. And I learned this form from LeHew, who got this from Quentin Hallett. And I think they're just like a little haiku biography. You know, they're touching. I like them. So that's how people are going to be introduced. Each person is going to do 2 poems, his or her own poem and somebody else's poem. The only person that's going to do 3 poems is Toni Hanner, because she's going to read Quentin Hallett's poem, since Quentin's not here. Okay, so the first person that is going to read is Cathy McGuire. And there's a word in her 6-word bio that I didn't know. So in case anybody doesn't know what chivvy means, it means to hunt or to worry. Cathy's chickens chivvy couplets charmingly. Cathy's chickens chivvy couplets charmingly. Cathy McGuire.
It's called doing the chicken chivvy. I'm on my tiptoes. No, I'm fine. I'll move with the microphone. So thank you very much, Kathryn, for inviting me to be part of this book. This one is about the South Fork of the Sandy Am, which is about where I live up in Sweet Home. Winter Capitulations. December river, a milky absinthe jade, swirls between high banks, drags ivy into long green swags. Now frothing, now calm, it glints through leaning trees below the scarlet brambled verge. The moss-furred maple stanchions, it hijacks an oak with treacherous fingering, argues down an ancient gully. The mutinous murmuring lulls those who don't listen. It is still muscled and brilliant up here in the wooded foothills, no hint of the flaccid resolution so far downstream, where, tamed by distance and age, it is put on display, lined with public art, bike paths, chain-girdled and steel-bridged, one more good citizen broadly doing its duty. And then I picked Judith Barrington to read because I have had a cabin in a national forest, and the sound of those old-growth trees going down is just massively painful. This is called Wood Becomes Paper, Becomes Word. The crack is sharp, like a pistol shot. It rings out above the messy noise of chainsaws and debris falling on itself. One by one, their backs break, each one a scream. The poet sits all day beside the creek. She cannot see the hill, 3/4 bald and littered with limbs. But she hears the trucks leave, each bearing 3 royal bodies tied down with wire. Bones are cracking all around in the air, bird-like bones of the child whose feet must be bound, strong bones forced backward in a prison cell. What words can come from this? What words must come? Thank you.
Tim, are you here? I didn't see you come. Okay. Tim Whitsel. Fishing lousy, he shopped among birds. Fishing lousy, he shopped among verbs. Tim Whitsel.
The first poem I'm going to read is narrated by John B. Hudson, Hallelujah, and the verse adaptation is by Gerald Ramsey, called Acknowledgments Prophecy. In the old time, by the forks of the Sandy Am, a Kalapuya man lay down in an alder grove and dreamed his farthest dream. He woke in the night, he told the people, this earth beneath us was all black in my dream. No man could say what it meant, that dream of our greening earth. We forgot, but then the white men came, those iron farmers, and we saw them plow up the ground, the camas meadow, the little prairies by the Santiam, and we knew we would enter their dream of the earth plowed black forever. River Dasein. It's a German word that was used by Heidegger, the philosopher. It means being there, or to be present in a world of presences. River Dasein. We watched the salmon sway, then thrashed madly again, as if accompanying a sightless individual returning to childhood streets and alleys after a prolonged absence. We are moved as she negotiates, tapping, scraping, and clicking between the architectures of memory and intrusions. Curd, ripening in the way. Dyings, sour endowment. We make a pact to reconcile the body, this house, or that engorged tree trunk, retaining wall, held fast, as though we were accountable for this unclean currency below. Not just western landscapes earn the adjective wild. Presences quicken these stolen lands our fathers worked so doggedly to prove. Thank you.
I knew I was going to miss somebody when I did my thank yous. And I want to thank Ralph Salisbury for doing a comment for the back cover. Thank you. Ingrid Wendt cannot imagine living without rivers nearby. Cannot imagine living without rivers nearby. Ingrid Wendt.
I'm going to read a poem by William Stafford. And this is a poem I didn't know until this anthology was published, so I'm very grateful for it. The title is Cottonwood. By June or July, the river flows lazily, shallow and clear among the sandbar islands, and I wade it, zigzag, exploring upstream where tracks of raccoon, possum, and waterbirds form a design to be read. Over it all, from millions of saplings that stretch on north, deep and immense, there arches the color of cottonwood. That certain tang in the air, maybe it wrapped and protected Crazy Horse. It hovered over his blood when they killed him. It freshened the laundry spread out in groves where mothers hung washing for wagon trains. It hovered the West, reminding in the new church, or jail, or tavern, that a great sweep of air waited beyond, outside, in long curves of the river. Every breeze brings that pungent but delicate smell. Embracing the day, I carry it homeward on hands and clothes, not knowing how sacred these days. 12 years old, June, July, Cottonwood. And my poem titled Columbus and Me, with thanks to Michael Moore for Roger and me. Columbus and me. Coming fresh to this Oregon soil, the greatest thing was to hike far from any human demand and to sit looking over land empty of human influence far as the eye could see. Horse Lake catching the first rays of sun, brushing between the three sisters. Ridge after rolling green ridge misted in silence. Or to camp at a bend in some river large and level enough for a tent. The simpler, we said, the better. Our red nylon parachute roped under some branch overhead and staked giant columbine wide to the ground. 24 and an ocean away from my Illinois home. More than 20 years away from tonight. Learning at last the names Kalapuya, Chinook, Takelma. Rethinking counties named Clackamas, Tillamook, Clatsop, Wallowa. How easy it was to sail, certain as morning, into a landscape no one human could ever have witnessed before. Not this rock, that riffle, not this birdsong leading us on. Such bounty falling into our hands.
It's so great to hear these being read aloud. I've been looking at them for months. Toni Hanner. Speaking French in broad daylight. Speaking French in broad daylight. Toni Hanner.
Let's see. Okay, the first poem I'm going to read is by my friend Connie Beitler from Southern Oregon. It was in our first book we did together 12 years ago. Libertine. Young paints lean to the grass, nibbling. The Williamson wanders by, cozies up in the eddy, licks the low-hung limbs near the curves she defined when she was high, full of herself, demanding. The young stallion nips the filly's rump. And then there's Quentin's poem. Thanks for letting me read this. This poem appeared in Donna Nova's Facem, the anthology that a bunch of us did a few years back. Cantilever. Don't we project? Don't we lean over the rail of the boat, build our house on the edge of things, put walls and cairns close to the sheerest drops? Don't we want to lean out as far over water as we can? Don't we envy the heron balancing on one leg in the creek? Don't our eyes follow the fat orange cat creeping out onto the thin, cracked branch, suddenly becoming a Chinese lantern hanging in midair? I actually wrote this poem for this anthology because I couldn't find a river poem that I wanted to send. Dragon's Tooth. All my yellow kayaks smolder in my ex-husband's garage, rolled up and scarred with duct tape. They spill from Mayflower boxes, half unpacked a dozen years ago, then abandoned. Rogue River lichens, Salmon River grit. The paddle that broke in half when the Klamath swallowed me down and held on, swirling me round and round forever, then grew weary and spit me out 100 yards downstream. That's there, break raw-edged amid the rubble. I won't go back for any of it. Thanks.
Cecelia Hagen. Secret to happiness, lower your expectations. Secret to happiness, lower your expectations. Cecelia Hagen.
sounds ironic when I say I'm happy to be here. But thank you so much for this book. The first poem I'm going to read is by Penelope Scambly-Schott. She's a poet that I admire very much. She's got a number of books, but Crow Mercies especially just really blows me away, that Calyx published, I think, a year and a half ago. And her poem in this anthology is called Above the Little North Santiam River, for my mother. When I walk through the tall forest, trees gather behind me. They whisper my cold name, which isn't Bunchberry or Slippery Jack or Good Daughter or even Penelope, which certainly isn't human. When I walk in the deep forest, a barred owl follows my shadow, hunting the mouse in my heart. The stiff whiskers of the mouse brush down the motes in my soul, each failure a perfect patience. Maybe, says my sick mother, I can die tomorrow. I would wrap her in long mosses. I would dip her in salmon water. I would name myself Rain. I would be washed clean. And my poem is called The Crooked Path, and I'm not going to tell you which river. Secret. I wanted him bad on the bike path, the river carving out his silhouette, my heart a troubled trout between the muddy banks of what I should and shouldn't do. The wind was a cheap perfume that made everything seem possible. I reneged on past promises. I vowed to be better later in my life. I knew the slippery lushness would turn sour, new losses would accrue, but what could I do? I rejected the naysayer. I embraced the river whose name is unsayable, sided with the luster of cottonwoods whose leaves wheel this way and that, whims made manifest and golden. To flip, to shimmer, to leap is divine. Come this way, he said, and the crooked path was well-trodden and welcoming. Thank you. Two more readers, then we're going to take a short break so that people don't leave with total brain fry after this. Maxine Scates has written 3 books of poetry. Has written 3 books of poetry. Maxine Scates.
Sitting there thinking how I misunderstood the biography assignment. So I was dreading that. This poem is my poem called The River, and I'll tell you where the river is. It's the Willamette at Peoria. The river. I want to lie down in the river. I know that's where sorrow is. Sorrow, the name I gave to a dog long after she was dead, because I forgot to feed her, forgot to feed sorrow, to remember she needed to be fed. The wild cherries glisten in the sunlight, the crows clatter overhead, and somewhere the woodpecker thrums a trunk. I know I could pick strawberries on the road to the river, bend in the dusty rows, reaching for them in that moment before sweetness fades. I know the raccoon lies dead by the side of the road, readying me. Or is it these days when the iris blooms as I want it to, when the cat sits perfectly on her corner of the fence? I know the flocks of redwings are waiting there. They flash in the trees. I want to drift all day in the yellow raft past the corn and fields, past the island, the sweet grasses on its bank. I'll feel the cool water coursing against my back. No, I know when Sam Cooke sings this world with all of its allurements, I want to cry. I know most of what I feel is the fault of something else, blessed singing, or those full glasses of wine. though maybe they only eased the way, or maybe I wasn't feeling it yet. I don't know. I don't know how to say it, though the body would, full of its love, its joy. I want to touch you. I want you to touch me. I want to lie down where your arms will hold me, where the birds are at work riding the half-drowning trees. The poem that I chose was William Stafford's Climbing Along the River, and William Stafford has so many wonderful river poems, and I was stunned to realize that he's been gone almost 20 years. Climbing along the river. Willows never forget how it feels to be young. Do you remember where you came from? Gravel remembers. Even the upper end of the river believes in the ocean. Exactly at midnight yesterday sighs away. What I believe is all animals have one soul. Over the land they love, they crisscross forever.
And our last poet in this set is Erik Muller. Erik is a Eugene poet who ... Erik is a Eugene poet who ... Erik Muller.
I'm not sure what SOS is in Morse code, but it's not ... I always feel that way when we get up and read. Kathryn has done a beautiful job, I think. As an editor, as a publisher, the job is to bring writers to audience, and we're doing that today. Another aspect of that, which is a community effort, is bringing all the poets together. Right? There are, what, 50 poets in this book? And they're Oregon poets, they're Oregon places, they're Oregon rivers. Another thing I like about it, and I'll get to my couple of poems here, is that she casts the net very, very wide. What the river brings. I think she must have turned that into a question. What does it bring? What does it bring? And it brought not only bunches of poems to her, but many ways of looking at rivers. This was not a literal collection. Milepost 19, Siaslaw River, under a drizzling rain, parking my car with the blinkers on. You know, that kind of title. These poems have a lot of space, a lot of breadth to them, and I really appreciate that very much. Is a poet who? Is a poet what? Is a poet why? Is a poet how? Right? I mean, the interrogative, it seems to me, is very powerful in this book. I'm really happy that Robin Cochran is here. This is a poem actually I wrote for her, and I gave her the item that this poem described. It's called To Tell You. Here is a man, lazy about knowledge, who can name only a star or two. Here is a man pawing through riverside pebbles, thinking he knows what he wants, but won't know until he finds it. Here is a man who places in your hand a single black lacquered pebble, bright as a star. A man who does not know what kind of stone it is, or what he means to tell you. George Hitchcock's poem, The Years, and because it's in an anthology about a river, automatically metaphors that maybe weren't there or weren't so evident in the poem itself leap to mind. This is in the section that he has an epigraph for, and it's Rivered Lives. It's toward the end. It's from a perspective of an older man, and I'm imagining that the boy in the poem is himself. So this is a poem of return, at least as I read it today. The Years, George Hitchcock. And this is one of his nature pieces. I think we're used to him as a surreal poet who never settles down in a place. I mean, the place is the wild imagination of George Hitchcock. But this is very much in a group of poems that he did that were quite Western portraits. The Years. Crossing the old trestle, I stare between the ties at the scarred face of the river. A storm is coming up from the south. The fir trees stir in expectation. A boy deals among the rushes, his hands cupped in the house of trout. How familiar this bridge is. There's a broken flume which drips water, a sawmill on the plank road beyond, the fragrance of new bracken, and from my wet hands the sunlight spills like an unending stream of fish. George Hitchcock.
Okay, so we're going to take a 10-minute break to stretch, get something to drink, get your little blood running through the brain. Okay, thanks. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why I did this book, and then I'm going to read my poem, which I had not planned to read, but Deb Casey gave me the what's what. She told me I had to do it, so okay, Deb. Thank you. Okay, so,
What's your bio?
Okay. Continuous, unexpected currents, my rivered life.
Whoa.
Okay.
No. You just make that up.
Continuous, unexpected currents, my rivered life. No, I made it up for Laura. I did. Okay. So, as I mentioned earlier, I began this book 3 months after I came to Oregon. I've lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for 37 years. So my transition here was really hard. And I walked around here at least for a year and a half, dazed and uprooted. I mean, I just was like a crazy person. I just didn't know where I was. But one thing that I did early on is I've got to find the things here that I'm going to love here. And the first thing that I found was the bike path by the Willamette.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then over by the Delta Ponds. And during my first months here, I went there 3 or 4 times a week. And through my walks there, I got to know the birds, the osprey and the herons, and I got to know the trees and how light is on the water here, and the 20 species of ducks right in the fall. Unbelievable. So I connected to nature here, like where have I landed? And I connected to nature here through the river. And then because I'm a poet, I began to write poems about the river. And then I started thinking, well, it'd be really interesting. I want to hear what other people who've lived here longer, who've had a life here, like what do they say about the rivers here? And so then I began to read people's poems, and that's how the anthology developed. It really developed out of personal need and a personal journey to understand why I was here and where I landed. So that was the first motivation for the book. It was my own journey. And I got so much out of it. I learned poets here, I made some contacts with poets, and I learned the voices, like how people speak here, how the poets speak. It was really quite a gift to me to do it. And it deepened my understanding of how people who live here a long time experience the rivers. So it was really an orientation for me. Last November, my motivation totally changed by why I was doing it. I'd finished my work with Claudia, and I was actually anticipating that. But what happened in November was that I'd sent out to 4 publishers to see if they were interested in the book. And on the same day, I heard from all 4 publishers. And guess what it was? It was thumbs down. So that was a really hard day. It was a hard day. I was deflated. I think I wrote Erik Muller this terrible email. It was just a bad mood. So I took the manuscript and I wrapped a red ribbon around it. I thought I was done. I wrapped a red ribbon around it. I wrote a little note to the universe and I said, thank you for the gift of this book. But I've hit a wall and I don't have any place else to go with this. I turn this over to you. And then I put it in the back of a closet. And I thought, that's it. I'll never see this manuscript again. And so that was going to be it. 2 days later, I'm sitting typing at my computer, and there's a racket in the closet. The manuscript is screaming and yelling and pounding on the walls. And, you know. And I remembered some of the lines and the poems that were in the book. And then I also remembered all the things that people had done for this book, the generosity, some of the things that I mentioned earlier. And at that point, the book stopped being about me. It was no longer about my journey. It was like, okay, there's a collection of poems here that are fine poems, and they deserve to be read. And a lot of people have put a lot of energy into this, and I owe it to people to do this. So it stopped being about my personal journey, which was important to motivate me, but it became about honoring the community that I found here. And that's how I feel about the book now. I think that I'm a midwife for a community project. It's really the truth. So, yeah. So, Chalk Drawings is the poem that I have in here. And I didn't practice reading because I didn't think I was going to do it, so we'll see how it goes. Unseen hands have left marks on the span above the river. A fairy with streaming hair and unfurled wings. A guitar marked Gibson, LS and PR forever. I imagine the midnight artists, moonlight white as bone, the water's relentless flow. The river asks of them, what gives meaning in this chilly hour? Backs arched, fingers wrapped around sticks of peach and blue, they draw their answers, as ancient brothers once painted hands and horses on the limestone belly of earth. So, first person up, I guess the second person up, Carter McKenzie. Poetry opens a way, opens me. Poetry opens a way, opens me. Carter McKenzie.
Thank you so much for this. It's so amazing and wonderful to hear these poems. I've been reading the poems from the anthology, and it's a pleasure to be here. I would like to begin with a poem by M.E. Hope. I chose Mary's poem because it simply stayed with me, and the image of the horse in the poem stayed with me. It's called Water Horse, and I just wanted to say, in Gaelic legend, water horses are they're supernatural creatures who are dangerous and formidable and malicious to human life. And that is the opposite of what is happening here. And the way she reconfigures the sense of water horse is very moving. Water horse. Straight down the worn rocks, careful to skirt the poison oak before finding the ledge that anchors the rope and provides the right angle for the leap. This is the pool we dove into beneath the bridge. The water churns green, shadowed with rock and salmon, and the ghost face of the mare that drowned here. Her blockhead still struggling as she twists under the saddle, the reins tangling her legs, the panic and weight forcing her into the crevices. Even now, as you swim past, her mane whips around your ankle, tugs as you force yourself to lunge back toward the shallows. I live near a beautiful tributary to the middle fork of the Willamette River, which becomes in this poem a location for many presences. Before nightfall, I hear the pace of leaves parting, the steps, a slow approach just now, deer making their way up the hill below my house, through madrone, cedar and fir, through poison oak and blackberry bramble and the soft grasses, And I cannot see but know it could be any woods just now. It could be mule deer making their way among aspen when I was a child. Trees I cannot see but know are gold in broad daylight in the autumn, like it is now, are gold against the mountains, against the blue, over entirely different mountains, remote and gray. It could be any woods and any deer, making their way up the road to my mother's childhood home in the Blue Ridge Mountains, the barn where Black Beauty slept, year after year, until she was simply gone, where wasps made their nests and the deer made their way to feed off the garden of my grandmother's early mornings, before the heat and mosquitoes set in, just as these black-tailed deer now feed off the pale green lichen and berries and fallen apples of this Cascade Range, this northwestern place. And what makes me think of Machunk Creek, Appalachian waters, swimming holes and fishing spots for my mother and her brother. Machunk like the sound of a stone landing in an echoing body at the bottom of a well, a stone you will never see again, once bright, and how I watched my younger brother and sisters come back from the woods with a bucket of catfish, singing, then fighting over who caught the fish. That picture of my brother's huge eyes and his skinny chest. What makes me think of the crow with a broken wing, saved by a child, who would not be saved in his 22nd year, my mother's brother. The abandoned shelter of dog houses, frayed burlap nailed to the entrances, how the dog I knew by the name of Scarlet, though no one else remembers that name, curled by the fire and allowed me to rest my head on her side. And I know it could be any woods, whole regions now in half light. A habitation of pitch black trunks of white oak trees, transparencies, which make me think of a children's book, a book I can no longer find, pictures of a mother and daughter crossing a bridge near a well-lit house, and how the sky deepens to cobalt and blue-black behind the trees, how the woods reveal themselves just like this. Near what I know are the approaching deer in the Cascades, here near Lost Creek, a path to the river among trees I do and do not recognize.
C. Rosenow writes small poems and smaller bios. Writes small poems and smaller bios. C. Rosenow.
This first poem is Tonka by my friend Maggie Shula. Leaving our heat-filled clothes on the riverbank, we soak like smooth white stones. And my poem is a haidun. Humanities. Love, family, friends, but something isn't right, isn't finished, isn't enough, isn't. The river rages by. I want forgiveness for wanting more. Instead, I hear, be satisfied, be grateful. Desiring the out of reach could cost everything. Whitewater, the fury in my heart.
So I thought, I'm not nervous. It's really great, But then Jenny Root came up and said, you forgot me in the first set. It's like, oh no. So you can see how relaxed I am. Jenny's poems fit into the Native American sequence that were at the beginning. So you'll have to sort of imagine me back there. This is Jenny Root. Thinks homophobia is so last century. Thinks homophobia is so last century. Jenny Root.
Sorry about that. But, you know, I want to say that this book, those publishers had better be kicking themselves. Because it's beautiful, it's stunning, it's a gift to poetry, to rivers, and to Oregon. So thank you. My poem is... Okay, so this is actually somebody that I met, Johnny Sundstrom, who lives on Rock Creek in Deadwood, and founded the Siuslaw Institute. And he has a very radical activist past, and he came to Oregon sort of running, hiding out. Spent a lot of time just sort of remaking himself, and then resurfaced and said to me, when I wanted to protect my land, I learned there are no boundaries. And that really struck a chord with me. And so this poem is basically my interpretation of his story. The language of rivers. I speak in a river tongue, my mouth alive with salmon, my land alive with conversation, forest and river, fish who travel the waterways home, muscle and memory. I listen to this land, dream basso notes of current and stone. When I dreamt in warm soprano, the salmon stopped returning. I was silent, stagnant. To protect my land, I had to leave, had to travel beyond boundaries. I left my watershed for the city with its stone monuments and state houses, its straight lines. I learned a new language, but when I spoke, my river spoke through me and filled my mouth with its journey of grit and silt, spawn and return, of floodplain and snowmelt and drought, of mudslides and log jams, riprap and trampled banks. Across states and continents, I spoke to people who understand the language of swirl and tide, delta and waterfall, and of human law, slow accommodation, bartered cooperation. Together in conservation, our rivers joined. I felt the salmon fill my mouth again. I returned and was no longer silent. I lay down in the river and spoke. Thanks. So then the other poem that I would like to read is by Floyd Skloot, whose work I've always admired. This is The Developers. They saw the land unfurling to the sea. They turned around and saw the river wink in winter light, the meadow filled with elk, marsh grass waving, and a scatter of trees gnarled at the edge of the estuary. They stirred like children waking at the break of day, like trees readying on the brink of spring, and knew at once how it should be. 24 houses, no, 40 houses, tucked and perched where the hill folds and rises. A gate, a main road paved to loop the crest. There would be a view that changed by the hour, with swirling wind and the movement of tides tinged by this furious sun in the west.
Deb Casey, marker maker, mother, Midwesterner meanders, process person. Marker maker, mother, Midwesterner meanders, process person. Deb Casey. You have to use hyphens to have that be 6 words.
Erik, I appreciate the wide net of this book that you put together here, which wasn't said into the mic. And I also appreciate being able to reach back to the person who kind of pointed me toward Oregon, and that's Barbara Drake, whose poem I'll read first, Up in the Mountains. And I was thinking how, in a sense, we met over the Red Cedar River, but we really didn't get to know the river. We got to know each other through the magazine that was named for the river. So it's kind of another element of the word. But her poem is Up in the Mountains. Up in the mountains, rivers are little pets. I know. I went once along the summit trail of the Cascades from Timothy Lake south. Even the lakes there were small shaving mirrors, silver spoons, icy and delicate as snowdrops. I saw the Brighton Bush River where it poured, no larger than river from the downspout of my own house. The Clackamas was a ribbon of clear water I could step across. So many rivers, and each was just a thread of silver, slipping through deep moss. We did our balancing act as if we too were very young on that road which was no road, along the summit, a tightrope strung between Clackamas Meadows and the Santee Anne. When we came down, I was unweary. Rivers which had been tame and small grew full and dangerous beside me. But I went in a dream like a maiden aunt who remembers only the pretty infant at the christening and doesn't recognize the deep and dangerous giant he's become. And it was actually the rivers and ocean of Oregon that drew Barbara, who was we met back in Michigan, back here to Oregon. There was so much passion in that family for getting back here. I couldn't help but picture this. So my piece is out again, and it's down along that bike path we've already heard about. With Kate, along the Willamette South Bank, jostling priorities, family art, sunshade, shifting position, not knowing I've claimed the place George the dog calls his own, drooly lab who comes to press his damned, damp, grimy tennis ball into my spine. Human limbs extend above the bushes. Someone rustles a presence, maybe staking a claim. We draw, Kate and I, what we don't see, coloring what we do. Distractions, worse better than the traffic, shift attention, affect the light cast on my careful selection. Kate's oblivious. What naked guy? The current moving past us won't be caught. My green, too green. Age 16, my youngest packs her bags. She's off across. How many bodies of water between us? And next time, what? Try again for a broader, cleaner, safer space or perspective, maybe more or less color and contrast. Today, a wadded bed wrap flaps, limp against the river's pulse. Threads of current gather, broad pleats, bright pinches, suspended desire. Might I trade pen for needle, sew, or sing? Grass blade taut between my thumbs, to saw a shrill prayer. Oh, dear, dear doves and grubs, my loves. Go, I say, go now. May you be among those you can trust.
So as I said, Laura LeHew is the person who taught me about the 6-word bio, and you'll see she's the queen of it. Laura LeHew always thought she'd be an astronaut. Always thought she'd be an astronaut. Laura LeHew.
Thanks, Kathryn. I'm still holding out hope. I'm going to start by reading a poem by my good friend Colette Giannopoulos, who is now living in Colorado. It says she'll be back. Object lesson again. The river again wanting me. Slow, it says, slow down. Look at how I caress each curve of rock, my adaptability.
I could give you that, more than you imagine, peace. It's the cool motion of water pushing me downstream to the unknown shoals that harbor spiders and stoneflies, gurgle of river water in my ears, my mouth, all the unsalable words let loose, my tongue for once unhinged, tumbling word over improbable word, holding me as if words could make me buoyant. All I ever wanted was to drown, for once to silence their incessant chatter. And my poem, World Without End, only $9.99. How it might have been if I'd used the right words. Unlucky days, things go wrong, like the ghost giving me stones to sew into my pocket, then transposing the lethe for the mnemosyne. Silence, another kind of violence, or the unsporting use of sarcasm, biting the membrane at its thinnest conjecture. I wonder, will my hair be dry?
Claudia Lapp, isn't it enough just to be? Isn't it enough just to be Claudia Lapp?
And it sure is. It was actually dreams of wild rivers that drew me to Oregon, as well as some friends who lived here. And so my own poem is a dream poem, and the river in it is more like the archetypal river, the psychological river, the Urfluss. I flew in bluest skirt swirls. It was the action of some grace that I received in dream, a grace in the form of fluid blue that swirled itself into a skirt of pleats and lent me lightness to swim in air. A smooth dance came when I put on that airy skirt, more cloud or blue river ribs than fabric woven. My dance was limbless and without strain. There was no stopping it. And that last line is kind of a prayer too, that more rivers will be undammed in the future. I've been hearing a lot about how quickly they recover their life and vitality when they're allowed to flow again. And of course, don't you freeze over now. Keep on tumbling down into deep, deep pool where all hard waters go. It's the psychological river. Well, I'm so glad that Kathryn read her own poem. I was going to read it. And instead, I'm going to read Fugitive Memory by Penelope Scambley-Schott, which is actually quite related to Kathryn's poem because it speaks of the archaic past and the way that rivers have been part of our collective history. And those languages that we are losing every day, like species going extinct, the Navajoic language and the Mayan languages and all those little tribal languages that are so gorgeous. Fugitive memory. In that old language nobody speaks, a river is rolling its storehouse of stones. Over and over, the river repeats its own real name, oldest word on the map. I watch a stranger step out from birchwood with twin crows riding his shoulders. From deep in an ice cave under a boulder, a tall woman and her dog crawl out like a mist. Now they call to me from across the river, and from so far back, I can never see across. In an old language nobody speaks, how will I talk to my gods?
John Witte, stormy weather giving way to sun. Stormy weather giving way to sun. John Witte.
Thank you, Kathryn. I've been trying to see if there's a pattern, whether people read others' poems first or their own poems first. And I know there's a certain risk in reading a marvelous poem like this one by Charles Goodrich before my own, because you won't even hear my own. It's going to cast the shadows. But I couldn't help it. It's called Ghost River. And it's a nightmare poem, as you'll see, a poem about our complicity in the degradation of the environment, and the river in particular. Ghost River. I thought I heard them again last night, hammering the Willamette, walling it in and hooking up wires, as if the river were made of plastic and iron. Through the fog of my dream came an old steamboat, dredging the floodplain for gold or wheat. Farmers, or maybe gamblers, were shoveling coal into the firebox, along with Indians and wolves. In the pilot house, preachers and bankers, lawyers and swindlers platted the prairies, forests, and swamps. Struggling to wake up, I turned on a lamp, and ghosts of salmon smolts poured out. The light rattled like coins. The hammering kept on, but it wasn't in the river now, it was in my head. I went to the sink and opened the tap. Clear water spilled out, cool and fresh. It had all been a dream. The river was leaping with fish, mussel with joy. I was so pleased. I was innocent. I was still asleep. And my poem is a little elegy to my sister. Lethe has been mentioned actually twice, amazingly, in this reading. The river of forgetfulness in Greek mythology that you cross in order to get to the land of the dead. When you come to Lethe, the sulks and slumps, the gray areas, you will put them behind you, the off days, the eyesores, the vast, turgid sea, let them go. The oddments and omens, the stammering, the wraiths and larvae, what are these? The slops and sludgy waste stream. You will allow these memories to last, the radiance, the broken phrase, the smidgens, the fugitive minutes. Drink now and forget.
They just keep on coming, the poems, huh? So this is our last reader, Charles Thielman. Strong and gentle spiritual grandfather. Strong and gentle spiritual grandfather, Charles Thielman.
Thank you all for coming. This has been a wonderful ensemble reading. It was so much fun. I'm going to read my poem first, and then I'll read Carlos Reyes' poem. It is really well organized. So this is a love poem, and I'd like to dedicate it to my wife, Gail. And it starts off, though, it's a love poem about poetry, too. We met in a poetry group. And it's titled Waking in April, which many of us often do, wake in April to write a poem, right? And so it goes like this. Waking in April. Wave crests like the faces of sleeping poets bisect my soul. Dreams, warm shirt unbuttoned and coaxed off my shoulders, below pre-dawn bird songs. Her scent, rivers inside my tongue and floods my chest. This is this poem is by Carlos Reyes, who is a Portland poet with this great shock of white blonde hair. You could spot it if you happen to be driving a bus like I used to do in Portland. Spot him 6 blocks away. It's titled Canyon Echoes. It's got 3 parts. That crack, isn't it an avalanche? A stick of dynamite detonated, echoes up the canyon. Then silence, silence broken by the bugling of tundra swans overhead. Then at my feet, water piping from melting snow on rocks' edges, points to sandy ground, to ditches, to creeks, over scree and boulders, to lakes overflowing, to rivers reaching the sea. The echo of empty oil drums echoes of empty oil drums across deserts, of scorpions bigger than sparrows, winds of fire, oceans of fire. What drips from broken tanks and piping, whose death sound is so slick and smooth you cannot hear it. Listen in the cool morning for snow beginning to melt, when water comes in precious drops and glistens on the perfect diamond of a boulder. Hear it hit pine needle deft ground. Hear it hit pine needle deft ground. Follow it to the creek, to the river. Carry it with you to the Pacific, remembering what that word means. Pray for peace. Pray for peace. Thank you all.
Hillary Clinton famously said, "It takes a village." And this book not only took a village, but there's a village in the book. So thank you all for being here and participating.